Alright everybody, in this video we are going to take a look at the clone stamp tool inside of Photoshop CS3. Now, the tool itself doesn't really work any better inside of Photoshop CS3. There's not been any enhancements to cloning. It's still a very popular tool though for actually taking away retouching images, removing objects from your images. But what's happened is there's a new palette, and that new palette comes in really handy, and I'd say what it does is it doesn't change the way the clone stamp tool works, it just makes it easier to use and easier to get better results from it. Okay, so let's take a look here. We're going to go to the window menu, and inside of Photoshop CS3 you will see a new option here called clone source. So I'm going to select that option, and you'll see here we get the clone source palette. One of the cool things about the palette is that it lets us select multiple sample points. So I can click on the first sample point. And the way the clone stamp tool works is you will hold down your Option key on the Mac or your Alt key on the PC, and you click somewhere to sample a point. Alright, and you're going to see what it does here is it tells me where I've sampled from. Okay, that's the first point. Then if I click here and I sample another point, I set that as my source for that point. So how does this all work? Well, let's say, for example, I were to click. I remember this first point was the one right up here. Now if I start to paint, I'm going to paint over here so you can see it. If I start to paint, see where my, look at that little crosshair. Kind of it's in the top right of the image over there. See where it is? That's where it's sampling from. Okay, so let's undo. Now I'll click this second point, and I'll paint in the same place, and watch where this one samples from. See, it's sampling from where I had sampled that second time. Okay, so it is indeed, it's letting you set multiple source points, and you can click and choose between each one of those without having to constantly go through your image and resample different areas. You can save certain source points here. So that's one new feature. Another new feature that I really like is the show overlay option. So let's actually do some work to this photo. I'm going to create a blank layer, because I prefer to do all of my cloning onto a separate layer. Now, one of the ways that I need to get this to work is if you look up in the options bar, when you have the clone stamp tool selected, you're going to see the sample option. Inside here it's set to current layer. What I want to do is set it to all layers, because if I just sample from the current layer, when I option click and I start painting, I'm just painting transparency. Alright, that's not going to work. So I need to set this to all layers. And then what Photoshop does is when I hold down my Option key or my Alt key on the PC, and I'm going to click right here to sample, you can see I've got the transparent layer selected, but I click and I sample, and Photoshop knows that I want to sample whatever is under the cursor. I don't care what layer it's under, I don't care what's covering it, whatever, I want to sample everything that's right under the cursor here. Okay, so that's why I turn on sample all layers, because now when I paint, it lets me paint onto that blank layer there. So let's take a look at the show overlay. So when I turn show overlay on, we're going to go somewhere and we're going to sample, let's sample this little point down here. Okay, now the overlay is on and it kind of looks like our image got gray. As soon as I start moving my cursor, watch what happens. See this overlay? You can kind of see it. It's almost like a little ghosted kind of multiplied image here. Well, what happened is it's showing me what I am about to paint. Alright, so if I click here, and I wish I'm trying to like point at the screen and you guys just can't see it, but if I were to click here, what is in the center of my cursor now, which is really from over here, is going to be painted. Alright, so let's move this up, and now I can kind of get a preview of what's about to be painted. And if you don't see it very well, let's bump the opacity up here. See, now you can see it a little bit better. Okay, so I know that I am going to start to paint these little particles from this flower right here. So if I click and start painting, it was kind of like a preview. It let me see ahead of time what I was going to be painting with. And now that I've clicked and painted with it, no matter what I do with my cursor, I've pretty much locked down my overlay here. So now I know if I want to put one up here, click, paint, and there it is. It puts one up there. If I wanted to, for example, start to maybe make a duplicate of the little girl, see? I knew it was going to be there because, let's undo here, because I can see it in the overlay. I can see her mouth and part of her face there. So I know as soon as I click and start painting that that's what's going to appear there. Whereas before we had this clone source palette, we never really had that control. We were always kind of guessing what the photo was going to look like when we cloned. So what this is doing, it's kind of giving us a what you see is what you get. And if you don't like this overlay, you've got a bunch of different options down here. Notice I have invert on. If you turn invert off, it shows you the actual photo as an overlay. So you've got a lot of different options to control it. But either way, while the clone stamp tool hasn't really changed in what it does inside of Photoshop, I think this new clone source palette really takes the usability of the tool, because I've gotten a lot of questions on it. It really takes the usability of that tool and it catapults it to a whole new level.